They stole my father's mountain cabin with forged papers and fake smiles. Said it was theirs now, part of some community expansion. But they didn't know who they were messing with. I'm not just getting the land back. I'm tearing their whole damn operation down, brick by crooked brick. I always thought my dad's mountain cabin would be the one place on earth untouched by corporate greed, HOA madness, or real estate vultures. Built with his bare hands back in the early 70s, it was tucked deep into the Rockies, nestled between pine trees and granite cliffs. It wasn't glamorous, just a weathered log structure with a tin roof and a porch that creaked like an old man's knees. But it was ours. After he passed last year, I let the place sit. Grieving's a strange thing. You think you'll drive up and have a beer in his chair, but then the thought of seeing it empty punches you in the throat. A few months ago, I finally decided I was ready to go back up there. I packed up my truck with some gear, a couple of six-packs, and my dad's old .38 caliber just for nostalgia. I drove 5 hours out of Denver, stopping once for gas and a greasy sandwich in a town with one functioning traffic light. But when I got within a mile of the cabin, I knew something was wrong. There was a new gravel road, neatly paved, recently flattened, and out of place like a tuxedo at a barn dance. At the gate that used to be nothing more than rusted chain and duct tape, now stood a heavy black iron security arm, and beside it, a polished sign. Welcome to Alpine Ridge Cooperative Private Community. Private community? What the hell? I got out of the truck, walked up to the gate, and buzzed the keypad. No response. Then I saw a guy in a gray windbreaker with a walkie-talkie and mirrored sunglasses step out from behind a pine. He looked like he took his job way too seriously for a man guarding trees and squirrels. "You a resident?" he asked, scanning me like I was smuggling meth. "I own the property at the top of this hill," I said, pointing past him. "Name?" he barked. "Jason McCleary, that's my father's cabin. Thomas McCleary died last year. I inherited it." He looked at his clipboard, then gave me a smirk that made my fists twitch. "You must be mistaken. Lot 34 now belongs to Alpine Ridge Cooperative. Transferred title last month." I laughed, assuming he was new or dumb, or both. "No, it doesn't," I said calmly. "That cabin's been in our family for 50 years. My dad never signed that place over to anyone. Hell, he hated HOAs, said they were just cults with better printers." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're trespassing." I don't remember exactly what I said next. Something between "you've got to be kidding me" and "call your damn supervisor." But it ended with a black SUV rolling up the road and two more men in sunglasses stepping out like budget Secret Service. One of them introduced himself as Douglas Hampton, president of the Alpine Ridge HOA. Tailored coat, manicured beard, politician's handshake that felt like holding a dead bird. "Mr. McCleary," he said with a smile too big for his face, "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. Your father entered into a consolidation agreement with our cooperative shortly before his passing. The title was transferred legally. I'm sorry for your loss, but the property no longer belongs to you." I stared at him, trying to process the layers of bullshit coming out of his mouth. "That's impossible," I said. "I have the will. I have the deed. I have everything. I'm his only child. And he would never in a million years have handed over that place to a group like yours." He gave me the same look you give to someone who just denied the moon landing. "Well, maybe he had a change of heart," Hampton said. "It happens." The documents were notarized and filed with the county recorder's office. "You're welcome to take it up with them." He turned and walked back to his SUV like a smug Bond villain. The goons stepped between me and the gate. I drove back to Denver in stunned silence, fists clenched on the steering wheel, questions pounding in my skull like a war drum. How the hell did they get the title? Was it a forgery? Did someone inside the recorder's office help? Did my dad get scammed before he died? By the time I reached the city limits, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a mix-up. This was a heist. A high-end, HOA-sanctioned, county-registered, lawyer-slicked land grab. And they'd picked the wrong son of a bitch. The next morning, I was standing in a government building that smelled like old carpet and broken dreams, staring at a clerk who had the emotional investment of a brick. She slid a copy of the property record across the counter like she was dealing cards in a funeral home. Transferred ownership. Last month. Alpine Ridge Cooperative. I felt my stomach lock, and the signature at the bottom wasn't my father's. It was a bad impersonation of it, slanted wrong, too careful, like someone had practiced it on a napkin. That was the moment I stopped being confused and started becoming dangerous. I didn't go home. I went straight to a lawyer. Her name was Sarah Mendez, and her office looked like she'd sued God and won. Framed court victories on the wall, legal books stacked like bricks, no fake smiles. When I handed her the document and told her the story, she didn't gasp or overreact. She just squinted and said, "This reeks." I liked her instantly. She walked me through the basics: title fraud, forged signature, possible inside help at the county recorder's office, potential involvement of not just the HOA but bigger financial entities behind them. Apparently, these mountain community expansions often weren't about gardens and barbecues. They were about land banking and development flips. In plain English, they weren't just stealing land, they were laundering it. Sarah agreed to take my case but warned me this would get ugly. "It already is," I said. "They brought fashion model security guards." She smirked. That same day, she introduced me to Luke Harper, a private investigator she trusted with cases that required equal parts patience and paranoia. Former law enforcement, the kind of guy who looks like he's always mentally 3 steps ahead and 2 levels annoyed. Luke didn't talk much. He just listened, then nodded once. "I'll start digging into Hampton and Alpine Ridge," he said. "People like that leave trails. They think the mountains hide them." Then came the third piece of the puzzle, Eddie Tanaka. I found Eddie through a mutual friend who once described him as a human virus with a moral compass. He worked in cybersecurity, network analysis, and digital fraud detection. Basically, if someone had hidden footprints in a computer system, Eddie could make them glow. We sat in a coffee shop full of people pretending to write novels. I slid him the document and the county registry timestamp. He didn't even look up. "This was uploaded from a private IP range assigned to one organization," he said while typing. "And if I'm right, yeah, same address cluster reused across several filings." "You're telling me the HOA uploaded their own crime," I said. "I'm telling you they weren't even creative about it," he replied. That night, Sarah filed a request for a temporary legal restriction on the property, trying to block Alpine Ridge from selling or modifying it while we investigated. It was rejected within hours. Too fast, almost automated, meaning someone high up wanted this buried. And that's when Jeremy showed up. He emailed me, said he had heard about my situation through property circles, claimed he was a construction consultant who had worked with multiple HOAs and had seen shady expansions before. Said he wanted to help because Alpine Ridge had ruined his uncle financially. He even sent documentation. On the surface, clean. He met us in Sarah's office the next day. Polite, too polished, too eager. "I know Hampton's type," he said. "They always use expansion clauses and pressure tactics on older owners, especially isolated ones." Sarah kept her voice neutral. Luke kept his eyes on him. Eddie didn't say a word, but something about Jeremy was off, not wrong, just too aligned. Later that day, before we had time to even confront him with doubts, something happened. An article popped up online. Not local, not national. Somewhere in that gray digital swamp where character assassinations go to breed. The headline screamed, "Sons of Greed. Denver man attempts to reclaim property already legally transferred." My name, my photo, a distorted version of my story. It framed me like a bitter heir trying to steal land that had been donated by a generous father for community development. Donation. I almost choked on my coffee. Eddie traced the website within minutes. The hosting, the security tokens, the ad accounts, all leading straight back toward infrastructure connected to Alpine Ridge. "They're not just stealing land," Eddie muttered. "They're building a narrative." I leaned back in my chair and cracked my neck. "Good," I said, "because narratives work both ways." 3 days later, I went back up the mountain with a plan and an agenda. Sarah said it was too soon. Luke said it was too dangerous. Eddie just raised his eyebrows and handed me a small camera drone the size of a hummingbird. "Eyes in the trees," he said, "in case they try anything stupid." They did. I pulled up to the gate at Alpine Ridge in the early afternoon. This time I didn't buzz in. I parked a few hundred yards down, hiked around the side trail Dad and I used to take when the main road got snowed in. It was still there, half overgrown, but it led straight to the back of the cabin. The first thing I saw was the fence. They'd built a 10-foot steel monstrosity around the house like it was a prison yard. My father's porch swing, his damn porch swing, was gone, replaced by a mounted HOA security camera. And the old trail I stood on? Now posted with a sign. Private. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I was halfway across the brush clearing, just trying to get a closer look, when I heard boots behind me. "Turn around. Hands up." 2 guys. Same suits from last time. One of them had that security guard swagger, trying to look casual, like they weren't itching for a fight. I turned around slow. "Afternoon. Just coming to see my dad's cabin." "This is private land," one of them said. "Back off or we'll detain you." I smiled. "You know this is still under active legal dispute, right?" They didn't respond, just stepped closer. I knew how this was going to go, so I went first. I ducked low and swung with everything I had. Caught the first guy clean in the ribs. The second moved faster, clipped me in the shoulder, and we both went down, rolling in the mud. I got a knee to his chest before the first guy tackled me from behind. There's no dignity in a mountain brawl, just pain and pine needles. Eventually, I got out from under them and sprinted down the hill. They didn't follow far, maybe afraid of cameras or thinking they'd already made their point. I staggered back to my truck, bleeding from my lip and laughing like a maniac. Later that night, I iced my jaw and reviewed the drone footage with Eddie. It had caught everything: the ambush, the punches, even one of them pulling a baton like he was auditioning for a riot squad. "Send this to Sarah," I said, "and make a few copies. We're going to need them." By morning, things had escalated again, but this time in a way that made my blood boil. An anonymous tip had been sent to a local news station. Jason McCleary, suspected of arson, caught near scene of small structure fire in Alpine Ridge. They aired a 30-second clip pulled from what looked like a blurry trail cam. Me crouching behind a tree near the cabin, then smoke in the distance. I almost threw my coffee mug through the TV. It wasn't just fake, it was a setup, a cheap one. The timestamp was off, the angles mismatched, and the structure that had burned was an old woodshed that had already been half-rotted years ago. "Fire was set post-visit," Eddie confirmed, scrolling through satellite timestamp logs. "This is amateur hour." Still, the HOA was betting on one thing: smear first, prove nothing later. If they could make me look unstable, violent, or criminal, the court might hesitate. Public sympathy might fade. Or worse, some judge would fast-track their consolidation because of community safety concerns. I needed a win, which is when I got the text from Luke. Let Jeremy run with false intel. I planted bait. Let's see if the fish bite. Bait, in this case, was a story, a lie. Luke told Jeremy that I'd recovered a hard drive with original property scans, irrefutable proof of forgery and criminal tampering. Said we were hiding it in a safety deposit box under a dummy name. We waited. 2 days later, Sarah's office was broken into. Nothing taken because there was nothing to take, but the timing was perfect. Jeremy had sold us out. We didn't confront him, not yet. Better to let him keep thinking he was in control. The more rope he had, the better he'd hang himself. That night, Eddie and I put together a video. It opened with the drone footage, cut to the security guys beating me down. Then the news clip. Then Eddie's forensic breakdown of the fake arson. It ended with me standing in front of my father's old trailhead staring into the camera. You want to know what's happening in the mountains? Look up Alpine Ridge Cooperative. Look at what they do to people who get in their way. My father's gone. His land was stolen, and now they're trying to silence me with lies and fists. But they forgot one thing. This cabin wasn't just his home. It's my inheritance, and I don't run. Eddie uploaded it that night. Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. We didn't buy ads, we didn't need to. By morning, it had gone viral. Going viral is a strange feeling. 1 minute you're an angry guy with a bruised jaw and a GoPro, the next, your inbox is exploding with reporters, lawyers, ex-HOA victims, and at least one guy from Ohio who offered to drive up with his constitutional militia. I politely declined. Barely. The video hit a nerve. Local outlets picked it up within hours. By the end of the week, it reached national coverage. CNN ran a segment, Land Theft in the Rockies, HOA under fire for fraud allegations. One anchor actually said the words, "It's like organized crime with clipboards." Couldn't have put it better myself. What hit even harder were the comments. People from Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, stories just like mine. Parents pressured, deeds switched, land flipped to community cooperatives. Old folks who didn't understand what they were signing, or worse, never signed anything at all. It wasn't just about my dad's cabin anymore. And that's when the real gold dropped. A guy named Thomas Velez reached out, said he'd worked maintenance for Alpine Ridge before getting laid off after asking too many questions. We met in a truck stop off I-70. He looked over his shoulder the whole time like he owed money to the mafia. "You don't know the half of it," he said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I used to fix their servers. They weren't careful. I copied everything." Back at Eddie's place, we plugged it in. What we found made my skin crawl. Dozens of files, internal memos, emails, investor decks. A whole goddamn expansion plan called Mountain Phase 3. My dad's cabin. Just one of 24 dune properties marked for acquisition by consolidation agreement. Every single one was owned by someone over the age of 70. They had charts showing vulnerability tiers. One document was titled, "Approach Strategies, Polite Pressure, Legal Friction, Forced Reclamation." It wasn't just sleazy, it was strategic. And the best part? In one email chain, Hampton himself asked someone if the McCleary notarization had been cleaned up. Timestamp. 2 weeks after my father died. Eddie grinned like a wolf. "They're dead." Sarah submitted the new evidence to the county prosecutor's office the next morning. She also sent it to 2 investigative reporters from the Denver Post and one from Vice, who was already digging into HOA abuses in the Southwest. We weren't just turning up the heat, we were igniting the goddamn boiler. Meanwhile, Luke was doing his own brand of damage. He had traced some of the signatures on other Alpine Ridge voluntary agreements and matched them against medical records. Half of them were from residents officially declared mentally incapacitated at the time of signing. One had passed away 4 months before his consent. Luke was smiling now, which was both encouraging and terrifying. He dug deeper into Hampton's past, found that he'd been run out of a similar HOA in Nevada 5 years ago under suspicion of embezzlement. No charges stuck, but there were whispers of offshore accounts, shell companies, and an ex-partner who fell down some stairs. It just kept getting better. We were on a war footing, but so was Hampton. That same week, we were hit with a counter lawsuit for defamation, property interference, digital intrusion, and my personal favorite, inciting community unrest. Sarah laughed for a solid minute when she read that last one. But it wasn't all funny. The HOA hired a vicious PR firm that started painting me as an unstable legacy heir with delusions of victimhood. They paid for local ads, ran social media bots, even got some washed-up attorney to do a YouTube video on why the McCleary claim is nonsense. Their message was simple. I was a liar, a criminal, and a threat to the peaceful harmony of Alpine Ridge. Sarah filed for a gag order on their campaign. We lost. Judge said it was protected opinion. Classic. But we had a bigger win. A circuit court judge reviewed our emergency motion to place a judicial freeze-on on my father's property. With all the new evidence, it passed. Alpine Ridge was now legally barred from selling, leasing, altering, or accessing the property until further notice. I almost cried when I got the call, but not out of relief, out of rage. Because the day after the ruling, I drove up to the cabin to check if the bastards were complying. They weren't. The fence was still there, the camera still running. But the house? It had been entered, the front door broken. Inside, everything was trashed. They'd gutted the place, Dad's old books torn up, his military medals scattered, even his fishing rod snapped in half like a warning. This wasn't vandalism, this was a message. There's a moment when fury sharpens into clarity, when the noise drops out and all that's left is cold resolve. That was me, sitting in the hallway outside the district courthouse watching Hampton stroll past in a tailored Navy suit like he was headed to a ribbon cutting instead of a fraud hearing. He didn't even look at me. Just nodded at his lawyers. 2 of them, both smug, both fresh out of a catalog titled Predatory Litigators Monthly. Sarah sat beside me, flipping through our binders unbothered. Luke leaned against the wall, arms crossed, chewing mint gum like it was made of vengeance. Eddie was late, as usual, probably finishing some digital wizardry that would either save our case or get him banned from the internet. The courtroom was cold and beige and smelled like wet paper. The judge, gray suit, grayer mood, was known for cutting through nonsense. I liked him immediately. The opening was textbook. Hampton's side came out swinging. Their lead attorney, some guy named Foster who looked like he'd once prosecuted orphans for jaywalking, laid it on thick. My clients legally acquired the property through voluntary agreement. Mr. McCleary is engaged in a campaign of defamation and vigilantism attempting to disrupt a peaceful residential expansion. Sarah stood up with the kind of calm that makes men nervous. Your Honor, she began, we will present forensic testimonial and digital evidence that Alpine Ridge Cooperative did not acquire this property legally, but rather through coordinated fraud, falsified documents, and elder exploitation. The judge nodded. Proceed. What followed was 6 hours of pure methodical bloodletting. Sarah started with the will, my father's original witnessed, notarized, filed years ago. She showed the court how the updated transfer agreement was dated after his death. She pointed out that the notary listed on the document had passed away 3 months before it was signed. The opposing counsel squirmed. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. Then Luke took the stand. He laid out the behavioral patterns, the pressure strategies used on elderly landowners. He referenced the internal HOA documents, the vulnerability tiers, the expansion maps labeled like military targets. He pulled no punches. Next came Veles, the ex-maintenance guy. Nervous, shaking, but firm. He testified about overhearing staff talk about forging signatures, shredding paper records, and making sure nobody ever sees the originals. Finally, Eddie. God bless Eddie. He connected his laptop to the court display and walked everyone through a digital crime scene. IP logs, registry timestamps, metadata discrepancies. He showed how the same Alpine Ridge internal IP had been used to upload multiple deeds for different properties within the same 36-hour window, always targeting elderly owners. He showed Hampton's personal email requesting that the McCleary issue be scrubbed quietly. Then he dropped the bomb. Bank logs, offshore transfers. Payments routed through shell entities based in the Cayman Islands. These aren't development expenses, Eddie said. They're payouts. The courtroom fell silent. The judge scribbled something on a notepad, then looked up. Mr. Hampton, he said, are you prepared to explain these documents under oath? Hampton's lawyer whispered something frantically, but it was too late. Sarah stood. Your Honor, based on the new evidence presented today, we move to refer this case for criminal investigation under Colorado Revised Statute, forgery, and offering a false instrument for recording. The judge didn't blink. Motion granted. A bailiff approached Hampton. His face twisted just slightly. Shock, arrogance, maybe even fear. Then he composed himself, buttoned his jacket, and extended his wrists. They cuffed him right there, in front of the HOA board members, in front of the press, in front of me. One of his lawyers actually gasped. Luke leaned toward me and muttered, "Didn't even get to use the stairs this time." Outside the courtroom, it was chaos. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward us like daggers. Sarah spoke calmly into the cameras, laying out the facts. I said nothing, just stood there, staring straight ahead. Behind us, 2 more board members from Alpine Ridge were being escorted away by federal agents. They'd cut a deal, Sarah said quietly. Plea bargain. Cooperate or burn. We'd cracked the shell. The rot was spilling out. Back at Sarah's office that evening, we sat in exhausted silence. Luke drank scotch. Eddie passed out on the couch. I sat by the window watching Denver's city lights blink like tiny fires. It wasn't over. But we'd hit them where it hurt, in their money, in their lies, and in public. I thought the arrest would be the final shot, the knockout punch. But turns out when you cut off the head of a snake nest like Alpine Ridge, the rest don't curl up and die quietly. They thrash and bite. 3 days after Hampton was cuffed and the first round of board members started flipping like pancakes on a hot skillet, I got a notice nailed to my apartment door. It was a cease and desist letter, but not from Alpine Ridge. From a company I'd never heard of. Centurion Ventures, LLC. I brought it straight to Sarah. She scanned it, then looked at me like I'd just walked into her office with a grenade. This isn't just a lawsuit, she said. This is a proxy threat. Centurion is one of the shell companies Eddie flagged in the offshore docks. Translation? Hampton's financial backers were still in play, and they were pissed. The letter accused me of interfering with a lawful development contract, unlawful incitement of civil disruption, and most outrageously, contributing to the depreciation of investment assets through willful media manipulation. I laughed. Sarah didn't. They're setting you up for a countersuit, Jason, not to win. To bury you in legal fees, they want to make you radioactive. Luke, meanwhile, had picked up a tail. Some guy in an unmarked SUV started showing up near his office, then his gym. Luke took it in stride, left a sticky note on the guy's windshield. Next time, wash the car. You're embarrassing the profession. The SUV didn't return, but the pressure was mounting. Eddie's server was hit with a coordinated DDoS attack. Sarah's office received an envelope of old photos of her family. Nothing threatening, just unsettlingly personal. We all knew the message. You shook the system. Now the system shakes back, but then came the break. Late one night, Eddie called me, voice tight with adrenaline. I got in, he said. Centurion, or at least one of their offshore hosts. And Jason, you need to see this. I drove straight to his place. What he showed me was a map, not a metaphorical one, a literal expansion grid, labeled Southwestern Tier Target Acquisition 2023-2026. Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, dozens of properties, each tagged with red, yellow, or green status. There was a legend explaining what each meant. Green, compliant yellow, under pressure red, pending forced transfer. A third of them were marked red no. I saw old family ranches, reservation borderlands, cabins just like my dad's. One had a photo attached, a smiling older couple with the word stubborn scrawled underneath. They're not just stealing land, I muttered. They're colonizing it. We sent the entire drive to the Department of Justice through encrypted drop, then sent it to every reporter who'd covered our case. No more hesitation. The backlash from that data leak was instant. One of the board members who had previously cut a deal disappeared, like vanished. Sarah got a ping from her legal contact. Guy was supposed to testify before a grand jury. Nowhere to be found. Another lawyer working with a victim in Nevada had their home vandalized, their brakes tampered with. This was no longer a story about a mountain cabin. This was racketeering, conspiracy, organized real estate warfare. And through it all, Jeremy, the so-called consultant, was still in the wind. We hadn't confronted him yet. Sarah said to wait. She wanted him comfortable, off guard. So we fed him one last piece of bait. We told him we were planning a major press conference revealing the entire Southwest grid. And we told him, through an intentionally insecure channel, that it would happen at the Denver Civic Auditorium at noon on Thursday. Eddie rigged the digital equivalent of a tripwire. If Jeremy passed that info to his handlers, it would trigger a signal trace. Thursday came, no press conference, but at 11:48 a.m., a private server in Miami pinged a security contractor in Utah. 2 minutes later, another Centurion shell registered a flight booking from Denver to Panama. Jeremy. We had him. Luke made the call. The U.S. Marshals took it from there. Back at Sarah's office, we watched the news coverage in silence. Photos of board members, charts, FBI agents raiding a Centurion front in Arizona, headlines screaming, "Fraud network tied to HOA empire crumbling after leaked map." No one smiled. We were too tired, too bruised. But we were close. The storm had passed. Now came the reckoning. It took 4 more weeks before I finally stood in front of the cabin again. The court had ruled conclusively, title restored, deeds corrected, and a criminal investigation into Centurion Ventures and Alpine Ridge officially underway. The federal case had expanded into multiple states. Headlines now spoke of real estate cartels and systemic elder fraud. I wasn't the story anymore, and that was fine by me. The fence was gone, the camera poles yanked out like weeds. The land was quiet again. Real quiet, not the kind you get in suburban quiet zones, but the honest, breathing quiet of trees and wind and far-off birds. Sarah, Luke, and Eddie stood beside me, each holding a cold beer. No one said much. "I didn't think we'd make it here," I finally said. Sarah nodded. "You were too pissed to quit. That helped." Eddie raised his bottle. "To tactical rage." Luke just smirked and sipped. Inside, the cabin was still a mess. Broken shelves, stripped furniture, some busted drywall. But the bones were solid. The hearth still stood. The wood stove still smelled like old fire and pine sap. I found one of my dad's flannel shirts stuffed behind a cabinet. Still smelled like him, too. We started repairs the next day. Volunteers from the online communities that followed the case offered to help. 2 guys from a veteran support group showed up with lumber and roofing gear. A woman who said her own parents had been targeted by a similar HOA in Utah donated all new kitchen fixtures. Someone even shipped us a handmade wooden sign that read, "McCleary Legacy, private property, and proudly not for sale." The restoration took weeks, but that wasn't the real ending. The real ending came during the final court date, when Hampton, now disbarred from any HOA activity, stripped of assets, facing prison, tried to file a personal countersuit. Something about emotional damage. Sarah crushed it before he could even finish the paperwork. He never looked at me again. But Jeremy did. He took a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. I watched him testify against Centurion execs with the enthusiasm of a drowning man describing the water. He admitted to everything: fake consulting, spying, even leaking our baited intel. Outside the courthouse, he tried to offer me an apology. I let him speak, then handed him a small box. Inside was a single flash drive. "Every file you passed on," I told him. "We copied it all. You didn't bury anything. You just sped up the clock." He didn't say anything else. Luke later told me Jeremy had left the state, probably for good. Good. Eddie, meanwhile, got offered a consulting role with the Colorado Attorney General's office. He turned it down and launched a project of his own, a whistleblower tech hub for HOA abuse victims. He called it HOA Hellfire. Fitting. Sarah was asked to speak at a legal summit in D.C. about housing fraud. She wore her worn-out boots and told the audience, "Never underestimate a pissed-off heir with Wi-Fi." And me? I stayed. Not forever, but long enough to fix the porch swing, to clean the hearth, to hang my dad's old fishing rod, split in half but mounted like a battle trophy. The cabin was never about square footage. It was about memory, about story, and now about survival. On the last night before heading back to Denver, I sat out front with a fire burning in the pit, a blanket over my legs, and a dog. Eddie's rescue mutt, now adopted by me, snoring softly at my feet. I looked out over the mountains, their edges cut clean against the stars, and raised a glass of whiskey to the sky. "Not for sale," I muttered. "Not now, not ever."